Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hayawam tawab la atam, za achikam yawam al Charlotte, which is good day. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam kaya hamlakat hashamayim kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call layim la la banawa Yahweh bahasham Yahweh shai bahasham rocha kodash wamashanala la konim nawa wamala akim shor chagadash, which is all praises too. Our Father Yahweh, which means He exists, bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Zah Yahweh Dayat, Judith chapter 9 and verse 5. And it says, for thou hast wrought not only those things, but also the things which fell out before and which ensued after. Thou hast thought upon the things which are now and which are to come. Yea, what things thou didst determine were ready at hand, and said, lo, we are here, for all thy ways are prepared, and thy judgments are in thy foreknowledge. All right. And ultimately, the end was prophesied from the beginning, so everything that ultimately is taking place present day was already spoken about before, in which those in the world ultimately say, well, we're no longer in biblical times. You see, well, that's not true because, the Bible essentially encompasses all times, So let's get another precept. Salat. Let's get we'll get Isaiah chapter 41 and verse. Yeah, we'll read this. This is Isaiah 41 and 20. It says that they may see and know and consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord hath done this, and the Holy One of Yasharallah hath created it. It says, produce your cause, saith the Lord, bring forth your strong reason, saith the King of Jacob. It says, let them bring them forth and shew us what shall happen. Let them shew the former things what they be, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare us things for to come. All right, in which you have those that are ultimately, at different times, all right, and in these times, they're ultimately in the spirit of, saying, what's not going to happen, and ultimately confiding in different ways of life, all right, and what their idols and stuff is saying to them is, that they ultimately is speaking of peace, prosperity, all right, things of this world, all right. When we're coming with the message of the scriptures, all right, the scriptures ultimately have things set at specific times, Habakkuk the 2nd chapter, in which those that they're not ultimately in this truth, they combat that, you see, but the scriptures is faithful and true. All right, so let's read this. In the NLT, it says, let them try to tell us what happened long ago so that we may consider the evidence, or let them tell us what the future holds so we can know what's going it says, so we can know what's going to happen, so it's pretty much a I don't know, I can't remember the actual term, but it's like a rhetorical question, you see, because people in this world can ultimately come with, what they're going to say is going to happen, what happened in the past, you see, but it's ultimately, it's a lie, and it's not tested and true, all right, which the scriptures say. I'm going to get this real fast. This is Psalms chapter 19, and we'll get verse 7, and it says, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple, in which we have a more sure word of prophecy, in which when we go into the law of the Lord, all right, it's going into the scriptures, it's perfect. All right, it converts the soul. All right, it converts. I'm going to get this word convert, and it says shawab, and it says to return. All right, so it's this word that ultimately the elect is returning unto the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Isaiah 1 and 26, the Lord is ultimately restoring the judges as at the first, in which it starts with this truth, you see, because the word of the Lord is faithful and true. Everything that is in the scriptures that's written, that is prophesied about is going to happen. All right, it has happened. It's happened in the past. All right, it's present day. All right, it's going to happen in the future. So it's nothing that, those that are not ultimately in this truth can do. Their incredulity pretty much is not going to dictate what's going to go upon the planet Earth. All right. So let's also get this. Let's get Isaiah chapter 42, and we'll get verse 9. And it says, behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. All right. It says, behold, the former things that come to pass. Behold means to look, to bring into attention. So when you look at things in history, all right, that's why when Esau sends his so-called scholars, all right, that go to dig up ruins and do research and things of that nature. They see the things that's written in the scriptures came to pass. Things with Noah's Ark, all right, the Red Sea, all right, things about Egypt. They see all these ancient relics and stuff like that, all right. When those things are brought into account, all right, ultimately these devils ultimately understand that the scriptures is faithful and true. All right, it's just the message that they push to the masses. They push a message of again, peace and prosperity. All right, what's right now. This is how it's going to continue on forever. YOLO. You only live one life. All right, just worry about the here and the now, and that's ultimately they push that message. Because they understand, all right, that the scriptures is faithful and true. All right, going into James the 2nd chapter, how the devils also believe and tremble. All right, so they ultimately want to push forth a message of incredulity and disbelief, so that their subjects pretty much don't bug out. But reading this again, Isaiah 42:9, it says, "Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare." All right, going into prophecy, it says, "Before they spring forth, I tell you of them." All right, because Amos, the 3rd chapter. All right, I watched Amos chapter 3 and verse 6. It says, "Shall a trumpet be blown in the city, and the people not be afraid?" All right, which that trumpet ultimately represents the prophets. It says, shall there be evil in a city, and the Lord hath not done it?" All right, the Lord creates, both the good and the evil. All right, so the Lord is ultimately responsible for all the judgments. It says, "Surely the Lord power will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets." All right, so the secret going into the mysteries of the scriptures is ultimately revealed to the servants, the prophets. All right, and before anything happens, as far as judgments, the Lord ultimately brings a message. All right, let's get that. This is Luke chapter 1, and we'll get verse 68. And it says, "Blessed be the Lord, power of Israel, for he hath visited and redeemed his people, and hath raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began." All right, so the Lord ultimately speaks, through his men. All right, and the message is revealed, all right, via the Holy Spirit. All right, and the message is brought out, all right, via the prophets. All right, so let's also get we'll also get, let me see, Jeremiah chapter 28 and verse 8. And it says, "The prophets that have been before me and before thee of old prophesied both against many countries and against great kingdoms of war and of evil and of pestilence." All right. And what again, the mouthpiece of the Lord ultimately represents the prophets. All right, in which the message is always the same. All right, speaking against great kingdoms, of war, of evils, and of pestilence, which evil goes into Eve is a time, ill is bad, so bad times. All right, because those, the heathen ultimately had a period of time to where they would rule. All right, and being that they rule in unrighteousness, chiefly Esau, Edom, bad times, comes to their kingdoms. So it says, "And of pestilence." It says the prophet which prophesied of peace, when the word of the prophet shall come to pass, then shall the prophet be known that the Lord hath truly sent him. So when the events of the scriptures ultimately take place, as it mentions in Ezekiel the 33rd chapter, those that were warned are ultimately going to understand that the Lord ultimately sent his men. All right, and that they were, essentially had it right, correct all along. All right, which represents, from our apostles and elders on down, of Great Millstone. All right, those are we ultimately represent, the men of the Lord, and contrary to the world's belief. All right, that's going to be known. They're going to understand when the prophecies essentially take place. All right, that they essentially was forewarned. All right, so let's also get this. This is Habakkuk chapter 2, and we'll get verse 1. Then it says, "I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower," because the job of a prophet ultimately is to watch. All right, Second Ezra, the 9th chapter, measure thou the time diligently in itself, you see, because when you liken it unto a timeline, all right, that timeline is ultimately the rod, all right, the reed like unto a rod, something that can be that is used to measure. All right, which it also goes into a standard. Like, when you go to the like the amusement parks, hey, you got to be at least this tall to ride this ride. So same with the scriptures. So the scriptures is ultimately a timeline. All right, it's a measurement, it's a standard. All right, and it's also to be lined up with current events to ultimately understand the times that we're living in. So it says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. All right, to measure the time diligently. It says, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it, in which the vision is going to the prophecies, because the prophets was ultimately given the message. All right, we got Amos, the 3rd chapter, the 7th verse. He revealed his secret unto the servants, the prophets. So the secrets ultimately go into the vision. Because the prophets was blessed with the vision. All right, 1 Samuel 9:9. It says, and make it plain upon tables. Make it clear, make it distinct, so that those that are ultimately listening and taking heed ultimately understand. It says, make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. And in the ancient world, when someone ran, that ultimately meant that they understood the message. Verse 3, it says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. All right, so it says the vision, the prophecy, is yet for an appointed time. Each prophecy has a specific time that, it is supposed to take place. All right, it says, but at the end it shall speak. All right, and not lie. It's going to speak and not lie, you see, because at a certain point in time, people are going to feel it. All right, Second Esdras, let's get there real fast. Second Esdras chapter 9, and we'll start at verse 1. It says, he answered me then and said, measure thou the time diligently in itself, and when thou seest part of the signs past which I have told thee before, then thou shalt understand that it is the very same time wherein the highest will begin to visit the world which he made. Therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes and uproars of the people in the world, then shalt thou well understand that the Most High spake of those things from the days that were before thee, even from the beginning. The end was prophesied from the beginning. All right, we got Judith 9, verse 5-6. All right, it says, for like as all that is made in the world hath the beginning and an end, and the end is manifest. The end is manifest, and it's ultimately why it says right here, Habakkuk 2:3, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. All right. All right, the part where it says, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. If something is manifest, all right, everybody's going to be feeling the effects of it. All right, that's why it says, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. When someone speaks, you can feel that vibration, so prophecy is speaking, so everyone feels the vibration of prophecy. Everyone is being affected by prophecy. All right, and it's not lying, you see, because it's manifest. It's easily grasped. It's easily understood. It says, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry, so in the flesh, it seems as if, it's tarrying, you see, but in the spirit, all right, it's not tarrying, it's happening right on time. And that's specifically how the Lord ultimately had it planned out, So I'm gonna get one more and that'll be it. But this is Second Esdras, or let me see, Second Esdras chapter 15 and verse 1. It says, behold, speak thou in the ears of my people the words of prophecy, which I will put in thy mouth, saith the Lord. All right, because these words are from the Lord. It says, and cause them to be written in paper, for they are faithful and true. All right, it's written in black and white, so therefore, just like in Esau school systems or Esau's world, he said, if it's not in black and white, it didn't happen. All right, so first and foremost with this word, all right, it's written in black and white. All right, so it's going to happen. So it says, and cause them to be written in paper, for they are faithful and true. It says, fear not the imaginations against thee. Fear not the imaginations against thee. Let not the incredulity of them trouble thee that speak against thee, for all the unfaithful shall die in their unfaithfulness. So regardless of, whatever a nigga, got to think or believe or say, and so on and so forth, the heathen, whatever they got to think, hey, the words of the Lord is faithful and true, and it's going to come to pass, all right, as we've gotten in these scriptures that we got, through the Spirit today. So, so just wanted to go into that. That was a beautiful edification through the Spirit. Wa Lord as well. You have a good day. Wa shalom, which is peace and to you.